Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome. Good morning.
Thank you very much for your invitation.
Thank you for coming and thank you for having taken the time for this chat. I have read a few of your thoughts and comments, and I'm absolutely fascinated by some of your conclusions. You see, one of the things I wanted to share with you is that over the last 40 years, I've been what people call a car guy, passionate about cars, and I've been making cars for the last 40 years. What we have been trying to do for those 4 decades is more safety, more comfort, more pleasure. It's all about giving the consumer more driving pleasure, better NVH, better comfort, more equipment, better air conditioning, massage on the seats, everything that makes your life easier and your life more enjoyable, and of course more safety. The conclusion, the consequence of all of this is that the cars have become much heavier, as we know well. The cars are using much more raw materials, much more resources from the planet. And you have stated something that for me is absolutely fascinating, and it's completely challenging what we have been thinking for the last 4 decades, which is if your car is more comfortable, more enjoyable, you are going to use it at a higher frequency. If the car is more comfortable with a better autonomy, you will drive a little bit far away than what you would do normally, which means at the end of the day, even though the efficiency of the product itself has improved, the way we are using the raw materials and the rare resources of the planet has not been reduced. And I think you call this the rebound effect. Absolutely. Could you tell us a little bit more about this? Because I think it's fascinating. It's completely the opposite what we have been doing so far, and I would like to learn from you what that could mean.
Okay, thank you, Carlos. In fact, this rebound effect comes from the 19th century, and it was invented by an economist called Stanley Jevons. And this guy was in charge of projecting what could be the coal consumption in the 19th century in England. And at the beginning, people were saying, well, the machines are becoming more and more efficient, so we will consume less and less coal. And he said exactly the contrary. He said, but if the machines, the steam machines, are becoming more efficient, then we will be able to use them in many places, and we will consume at the end more coal with more machines. So he was the first to, let's say, invent this rebound effect, and it's working really everywhere. I think the history of the technology shows that every time we have made some efficiency progress, this efficiency progress is more or less partially or totally eaten by the fact that we are going to consume more in volumes. I think the best example in our civilization today is everything regarding IT, the digital economy. Of course, we have progressed very much about how to store just one bit of information in a data center or to exchange this information. This is much more green than it used to be. But we are just multiplying by 2 the number of data we need every 18 months or 12 or 18 months. So, of course, then the invoice, the environmental invoice of the digital economy has been increasing very much. It's still increasing in absolute terms. Now it's emitting, I think, more CO2 than all the planes Aryan sector. And it's not breaking because of this rebound effect. And we have it more or less everywhere. And I think if we look at, for instance, car sharing, I think it's a very interesting example because, of course, there are very different types of car sharing. We could say carpooling. I just rent my car to someone at the weekend. Or you have this short distance car sharing for just the travel. Yeah, exactly, commuting. Or you have this long-distance car sharing. And if we take the example of this long-distance car sharing, what happens, of course, is I go from Paris to Dunkirk with 3 people in the car instead of 1. You say, great, I have saved the travel of 2 cars, so it's really an efficiency of, let's say, 66%. But in fact, it's not the way it's working, because in the car, maybe one person was taking the train before, but it's now too expensive, and it's better to take a car. And maybe another person, because it's so cheap to make this new travel, the offer is like 10 euros or 15 euros. Well, maybe I can go and take a beer with a friend, and I will create an additional demand for transport, for mobility. And the third person, the one who is driving, maybe is even doing more often this Paris-Dunkerque.
He's sharing his cost.
He's sharing his cost, he's sharing the price exactly of the fuel. So at the end, I think when we look at the number of liters of fuel that is going out of the refineries, you have saved nothing. And this is very difficult, of course, to split between what has been the real efficiency, what has been the growth absorption through this sharing system. But at the end, we know that it's becoming difficult. And even going to these autonomous cars, I think, of course, there are various types of autonomous cars to be seen or to be foreseen in future. But let's imagine that the autonomous car would be a property car, not the car of Jeremy Rifkin, who says that we are going to share everything and nobody will be owner of a car. But let's imagine that some of the autonomous cars would be my car only. Then what happens? I will have the possibility to be in my car like a mobile office, and I may be able to start from 7 a.m. in the morning or even 6 a.m. and then the 1 hour or 1 hour and a half or 2 hours that I will spend in my car will be like as if I would be in a home office. So I will be able to live even farther from my work than today. Yeah, so I will also create, or it may also create a certain rebound effect.
You're absolutely right, because you see, I have a 1 hour commuting in every morning, and I consider that I'm in my office working from the moment where I step out of my house, sitting in the car, and from that precise moment, I'm working. I'm working on my iPad, or I'm working on my phone, and exactly what you described. But then what is puzzling is that we believe in our modern societies that technology is going to solve many of our environmental issues. But at the end of the day, because there is this permanent quest of more comfort, more safety, more convenience, that is, I would say, very representative of what the human being finally is, then the technology breakthroughs are always used to go a little bit further in the search for safety or comfort or convenience, which then doesn't fix the environmental issue. And that is very puzzling, because it means that we need to create another way of life, another way of enjoying mobility, another way of enjoying nature, the life with our family, our friends, which is all about how aspirational are we in describing a low carbon footprint, enjoyable life for the future, which of course is something that so far no politician has explained to us. There is no vision about what is the enjoyable, safe and great life we could have with a low carbon footprint. And then you come up with another notion, which I think is absolutely striking. You talk about low tech. You talk about simple things, robust things that you can repair, that you don't have to throw away at high frequency. Could you explain to us what is the aspirational level of a low-tech life that would lead to a low carbon footprint life?
Yeah, I think that the basis of this low-tech approach is not to come back to the candle or to live in caves or anything that we could think about with this kind of term. At the beginning, it was a bit provocative to explain that this high-tech world that we are constructing, and that's normal to progress and to have some innovation in technology, but that we are in fact getting, it will create probably a more and more difficult situation to create the circular economy, because these high-tech products, where we use different types of rare metals that we are putting in the steel to make it a high-performance steel, or that we put in all our digital objects, are very difficult to handle when coming to recycling. And we recycle physically, but we are not able to reintegrate them in the system with the same performance. So there is a kind of downgrading of the resource, downcycling of the resource. And because of that, I was thinking of this, let's say, yes, low-tech approach, and it does not say that we have to do everything low-tech. I think it's more that like a journey, I would say, or a way of thinking to say, how can I really save some resources? And if I look at the car, for instance, what could be a low-tech car? I think that you were exactly describing this a few minutes ago, saying that we have been enriching our objects, at the end to produce more or less the same functionality, which is to say I go from a point A to a point B, but of course then with a higher comfort or with more equipment, or I can just put all my things are going to move along with small electric motors and so on. On this enrichment has of course some consequences about the extraction of resources from the Earth crust. And what could be a low-tech car is just to agree that all the savings that these marvelous engineers have done about how to be more efficient in the engine, about the exhaust system, etc., today is lost because we are doing this higher enriched technology called technologically enriched cars. And if we would come back, let's say, to make it simple, to a very basic standard 700-800 kilos car of the 60s, or let's say of the early 70s, but of course with maybe a better catalytic exhaust system to avoid to have too many, let's say, local pollution. I think this car was also bringing some freedom, and I think we can probably the people who lived in these decades, they don't remember them like bad decades in terms of freedom. But there were smaller cars, and I think that today we see that the average CO2 emissions of a new car is getting to grow again, despite the technological advantages, because we are selling more and more sport utility vehicles, or let's say bigger cars. And my idea is to say, okay, maybe one day we will have to step out of the civilization of the car, maybe one day. But we cannot do that tomorrow, you're right, because people need cars, because we have built all the society around this functional approach that we don't live at the same place we are working, and we don't have the leisure time at the same place, etc. So we need cars. That's for sure. There is a constrained mobility. So we have to address it. But how to address it? Shall we go to very big, very enriched cars, electric cars that are weighing 1.5 or 2 tons, which may bring some CO2 advantage, but depends how many kilometers you do, where the batteries have been produced, etc., etc. Or could we go back, let's say, to lighter cars, maybe a bit less performing cars, less equipped cars, that would really bring immediate CO2 advantages, and maybe not jumping on electricity, or maybe jumping on electricity for some types of the cars that can solve some very local issues, like in hyper-urban areas where we need to solve some particles problems and so on. But I think that the system should be hybrid, and going to only one big solution like electric, for me, is probably not reasonable.
Yeah, I think you are on the spot. I think there is a simplistic way of looking at some of those issues. But you mentioned a point that is very important for PSA, which is efficiency and effectiveness. It's all about effectiveness. How effective are we to bring to the market mobility devices? I'm not calling them cars. I don't know what that would be. I'm just starting from a reference point, which may be challenging, which is to say, well, human beings would like to protect their freedom of mobility. Freedom of mobility is important for a human being, regardless of the mobility device you would be using. And we are bringing the electric cars because we are told to do so. It's fine with us. We have all the engineers, all the technology we need. At the end of the day, what you mentioned is that we cannot look at the mobility device on a standalone basis. It's all about the life cycle analysis of how we use the energy, the rare resources of the planet, etc., how we fulfill the freedom of mobility need in a way which is totally effective. And this is something that is not a superficial thinking. It's quite deep, because it embraces a 360-degree approach of energy production, mobility device production, recycling of that mobility device. All of this needs to be taken into consideration, and we see that the current communication is very superficial, just about putting a camera on a tailpipe. And that does not represent the whole problematic that we have to solve. So this notion of effectiveness, which is basically trying to be more efficient in the way we use the resources, is something that we understand well at PSA. Surprisingly, because we were 5 years ago almost bankrupt. So when we were almost bankrupt, one of the questions was in the company, are we using our resources in a wise way, in an efficient and effective way? And of course, the answer was no. So through the cost reduction activity, we found many situations where cost reduction activity and environmental consciousness are perfectly converging. And you were talking about what you would call, in your terms, more basic products at 700 kilograms and not 1.3 tons, which absolutely makes total sense. And then the question immediately, if I was to put in the marketplace a car at 700 kilograms, which of course we can, immediately the question would be, is it as safe as a 1.2 tons car? Which in terms of energy absorption may not exactly be the case. And as you know, we have a lot of ratings, consumer ratings that would say, yeah, but you don't have 5 stars, you are only 3 stars and this. And I know that in my company, we would have a huge discussion on that matter because safety is a must and safety is always #1 priority. Which then means, okay, if the cars at 700 kilograms were not as safe in the 70s as they are today, which is a fact, then would our society, our consumers accept that? Most probably they won't. And then we would say, okay, now we need to drive at 30 kilometers per hour instead of 70 or 80 because of the safety concerns, which then means, well, in that case, the freedom of mobility is going down, which means you need more time to do things, which means you are less productive, etc. So at the end of the day, all of this is possible. All of this is absolutely possible, and we have the technologies and the engineers to imagine that. At the same time, I think when we are talking about emissions, raw resources, it's all about the lifestyle. It's all about we are here to support the societies in which we operate. There is no other concern. And our mission is to deliver freedom of mobility. But we need to understand what is the lifestyle changes that the citizens will accept in order to deliver and protect the planet at the end of the day. And that's not easy for us to understand, and this is one of the reasons why I'm enjoying so much this kind of discussions with experts like you is, if there is another dimension of happiness on a low carbon footprint life, somebody has to describe how enjoyable that will be so that the consumers naturally will accept to change their behaviors to go in that direction because they see a better life with a low carbon footprint. While protecting their freedom of mobility, having a reasonably safe way of being mobile, not absolutely safe at 100% because that does not exist, but with something which is balanced and acceptable. How you see this process by which we could come up with an aspirational low carbon footprint life? I know that you have written a very interesting book about it. Could you tell us a few more things about that?
Yeah, I think that what you point out is very important, the fact that at the end we are in a system, and of course one player, a person or a company or even maybe a state in this big global system cannot change like this without having a certain adaptation. And what you mentioned about the safety, for instance, or the fact that we could reduce the speed or reduce the weight of the cars, only works if it's a systemic approach, which means that I do agree that with my kids, if I am in a car of 600, 700 kilos, but I'm crossing on an everyday basis some other cars that are 1.5 or 2 tons, then I have a problem. And I think it is probably one of the drivers of people taking bigger and bigger cars is probably that they are just seeing these cars around, and it's not that they want to imitate, but they want to protect themselves too. And exactly. Just the height of the seat probably has a certain, of course, perception. So I think that the way to do that is, for me, is a mix of what could be the consumer perception, and I think that things are changing anyway, and we will be probably surprised by what the young generations think. Of course, like every generation, we will be surprised by the followers. But also it has to come from the political power, and I think that we could have absolutely a kind of approach which would be a regulation approach. Of course, nobody asks to say you are PSA and you have to produce only small cars that are not performing to go upon 100 kilometers per hour. Well, it would be crazy. You would be like Harakiri, and of course you would destroy turnover and so on. But if everybody has to do so, if there is a kind of federation approach, then I think the rules of the game would be different. And by definition, we all know that these agile companies and so on, and the strength of the capitalism is to be able to adapt to new conditions of temperature and pressure, would say the engineers. So I think that this is something that we could, let's say, imagine that, for instance, having either to ban the biggest cars or the very, very expensive and very expensive from an environment point of view, I mean. Or it could be like a tax that would be very progressive but very high when it goes to more kilograms or higher performance, which in France we used to call vignette. It was something like this. I mean, the bigger the car, you had to pay every year something which was important, and it was a kind of also social justice. And I think when we talk about making efforts, because you're right, to a certain extent, we will have to make efforts, and we will keep a certain freedom, but to how many kilometers per hour as average speed, how many travels per year, per day, this may evolve, and this could be seen as efforts by our friends, citizens around us. But if the effort is always better when everybody makes it. I think that what happened with these yellow jackets, I think we could say a little bit that, okay, I have to be in my car, I pay more the fuel because there is an extra tax, and then I can only go at 80 kilometers per hour. But then I know that the government people, maybe they are taking planes to go home for the weekend. And I think that was one part of the explanation, maybe. And so maybe this federation approach or this regulation approach could be a way to find a solution there, because we say we all go together, and yes, we will reduce maybe year after year or every 5 years, and given some visibility to the industry, because you cannot survive, I would say, if every 2 years the direction is changing. But to go to lighter and lighter cars, keeping, of course, the best of the technology to ensure a higher, I agree with you, safety than in the 60s or 70s. But we have invented some, I think, safety belts and airbags and so on. We can keep part of that. And then there is also another point I would like to mention, which I think could be interesting regarding this resource scarcity, because you mentioned this recycling and so on, which I think I've noticed some of the efforts that to integrate some of the recycled products, or to handle better the recycling at the end of the life cycle of the car. But I think that one point that could be really disruptive would be to take the opportunity of all the progress we've done in the objects in these cars that are, at the end, the steel is better than in the past, and probably you use zinc and other things to avoid that they are attacked by corrosion and so on. We could only change motors, for instance, and spare parts, just the engines and not the full car. And it would be a new model that maybe, okay, we know that there's always this prime à la casse in France who say, yes, okay, let's destroy the old cars that are more polluting to buy new cars. But why not just changing the engine? Why not just making these products really sustainable by lasting like 20, 30 years? Because at the end, we know that they could largely support this lifetime by changing some of the parts, the spare parts. What about this approach?
I think it's something that we could, of course, work on, and it's very, very much aligned with the circular economy that we are now embracing as much as we can by creating a specific business unit on that specific topic. At the same time, again, the question would be, if at the same time we want to reduce the amount of rare resources we are using, extracting from the planet, and meet other challenging goals like reducing the emissions or improving safety, etc., the point is how we converge. And you mentioned that, I think it's very appropriate to say that if the societies were all evolving in the same direction at a reasonable, similar speed, for global companies like ours, that could be possible. I mean, there is an example of what you say in Japan, which is called the K cars. You know, a very specific regulation for very small cars that you can use in the cities and even outside of the cities. It worked in Japan because it's a very organized society, very disciplined society, and people respect rules as a matter of education, which is not the case, as you know, in the Western society. Mm-hmm. So if we were able to define the same destination in terms of what freedom of mobility means on a global perspective, of course, everything you say is absolutely possible. We can work on a car that lasts 20 years, on which we change the engine after 10 years. It's absolutely possible. That's not a problem. Mm-hmm. From an engineering and technology standpoint, that's not a problem. What would be a problem for a global company is that you have this kind of approach in France, another one in Germany, a third one in Asia, a fourth one in North America and Latin America, etc. What we have to recognize, and I'm not pushing back on this idea because I think it's a great one, but the reality where we are starting from is that we are unable currently to make converge the regulations of the Chinese market, the North American market, and the European market. We are unable to make those regulations converge on two basic things, which are emissions and safety. And that's basic. I mean, if you want to create conditions for that kind of approach to be possible, first thing to do is North America, enlarge Europe, Asia, same regulations on safety and emissions. Why doesn't that happen today? Yeah. Because there are, of course, local trade interests that are opposing that. North America wants to protect its own industry, Europe wants to protect its own industry, China wants to protect its own industry. So that's something that would be possible if there is the sense in the whole humanity that first thing to do is same regulations for everybody. And they may be difficult. And then you have the second point coming after, because Chinese, Europeans, Americans will say, yeah, okay, so we have very stringent emission regulations, safety regulations, because our citizens are asking us for that. Okay, so we do that. What about the emerging countries? They will say, well, we are not tier 2 citizens, right? In India, we are not tier 2. In Brazil, we are not tier 2, right? So in Russia, we are not tier 2. Oh, of course you are not tier 2. You are a human being. I respect you as being a tier 1 citizen of this planet. So I will give you the same regulations. Then people say, well, I cannot afford that. That's extremely expensive. You know, I'm a winemaker. In north of Portugal, I have a few vineyards, and everybody's driving a pickup over there. Yeah. Why? Because it's a basic tool. Basic tool for making agriculture is a pickup. So, and they are not always very environmentally friendly. So that's something that is absolutely paramount, aligning all the regulations, and then how you deal with the cost of mobility, as you cannot tell somebody that he's a tier 2 citizen, so he needs to have a low cost of mobility, hence he cannot enjoy the best low emissions and the best safety. It's not possible today because of course, the internet that makes a level playing field of information for everybody. So that's where we are. If we have to fragment our research and engineering on specific products for different kinds of markets and expectations, which we can, and which actually we are doing, it reduces significantly our ability to go in the direction that you mentioned, which, for me, is absolutely thoughtful. The point is, around which parameter do you want the community of engineers to optimize the mobility? All over the world, roughly, you will find 300,000 to 500,000 engineers working in the worldwide automotive industry. Mm-hmm. For humanity, it's in our interest that those 300,000 engineers put all of their brains on finding the best solution. But they can only do so if you give them the areas around which you want to optimize. And you may say, I want to optimize the rare resource consumption, and I want to optimize emissions eventually. Then tell me what are the best solutions. If you say so, on a global basis, we'll give you all the solutions you need. Now, if you say, I want top safety, zero emission, low cost, etc., there is a point in time where at this stage there is no solution, even though there may be one in 10 years, if you focus the full power of engineering of the worldwide automotive industry in the same direction. So I'm not pushing back. I'm just saying for that to happen, first thing is align regulations and align expectations and be able to make unpopular statements. An unpopular statement will be, look, if you want to protect the planet, you cannot protect yourself as much as the planet. So you need to accept that safety is not 100%. It's 99.9. But the 0.1 remaining, yeah, well, you have to accept it. It's life. It's the risk of life. So you see, that's very unpopular. I would not dare to say that from a corporate perspective, from a CSR perspective. I would not say that, even though we are being filmed here. So I would say, okay, what do you want to be the sharpest point of optimization? Is it rare resource consumption? Is it emissions? Is it safety? You cannot have everything, because you believe that technology can solve everything. But we have demonstrated over the last 50 years that no, we are not solving everything. We are bringing more convenience, more comfort, more joy, but we are destroying the planet. So how do you want to balance this? Which brings us back to lifestyle. And then from lifestyle, it brings us back to what is the enjoyable life that we would like to have, a low-carbon life that would protect the planet, that would make us even more happy than we are today. And that's, I think, the key question.
You're true, but what is terrible is that I think you are an engineer and so am I, and if the world would be a company, let's say, and we would need to make some CO2 cutting the same way you were cutting costs 5 years ago, we would go for such solution. We would say, okay, let's imagine that I don't touch the number of kilometers per person, or even I would even develop a little bit because some markets are emerging. Then the only rational solution that we would find would be to reduce the size and the speed of the cars, for sure, because it would be probably the most efficient and most rapid way to reduce these CO2 emissions, because the equations of physics are like this. And what is difficult is that I agree with you that as far as we have not, let's say, either a worldwide decision or maybe at least a big European decision, it's difficult to do like this, because all the parameters, including this lifestyle and aspirational thoughts of the consumers, go to higher, bigger, more expensive maybe cars for the ones that can afford it. Whereas we should go for these smaller and lighter cars. But I think that you could have so I do agree that it cannot be just a one company approach, fully accept that. But you could imagine as a federation to say, guys, look, of course you need to have a certain credibility there. I do agree, and maybe some of the companies in the past cheated a bit, and maybe the credibility is a bit difficult to regain, let's see, but you are the experts here, and you perfectly know these physics equations. And you could say, okay, the best way to reduce emissions probably first is like a mix of solutions, and maybe electric is not for everything and every kind of usage because of this life cycle approach and the cost per kilometer, which may be very dependent on the number of kilometers that you are driving per year, for instance. But that, okay, we as experts, we recommend that you should go for smaller cars, which means that maybe take a fiscal approach that could be, okay, at least European level in the first stage, because we have maybe more power in, I don't know, in Europe than in China or elsewhere. But that okay, put a tax on the kilogram in Europe, which will be good for probably also for the local work and employment and so on. And let's experiment these new systems. And I think it should come from a federation. It will be very difficult to have. I think the politicians, they have to probably, that's a pity, but they have to simplify their messages, and so it's simple to say, okay, electric is green, so let's go electric, and then behind, okay, I let the industry work, and I think as experts you could really be the one saying, hey, sorry guys, but I have another idea, and at least for the transition period it could be really efficient, and just reducing this average number of kilograms per new car that is put on the market today, I mean, would immediately reduce the CO2 emissions. It would be very interesting.
I think that's a great point. What I understand from what you say, and trying to go finding the solutions, if we were to say that we can propose mobility devices that limit itself to a certain level of cost per kilogram of mobility, kilometer of mobility, cost per kilometer of mobility, and CO2 emission per kilometer of mobility. We say, well, this mobility device offers you less than X euros per kilometer of mobility and Y grams of CO2 per kilometer of mobility. I think that's absolutely possible. By the way, we have a few proposals in the pipe that will go in that direction, and I think that's possible. Now, again, it's not about always being able to find the solutions. It's a way of finding the solutions within a frame of constraints that creates the market. And our responsibility is to ensure the sustainability of our company. We have 200,000 people working for us, which means 1 million people if I count the family members depending on our company. So we have also that ethical responsibility vis-à-vis our people. So go in that direction, say, well, we have a mobility device, it costs this, and it's limited to X euros per kilometer of mobility and Y grams of CO2 per kilometer of mobility. That's possible. Now, the starting point, if we were to think in that direction, and we would say, well, in terms of safety, it is going to meet this standard, but not that standard, but that's what you can have. If we go in that direction, I just want to testify with you, not to be neither cynical nor pessimistic. We just need to be realistic. Where is the starting point? The starting point of this approach today is European Union, representatives of the people in the Parliament, representatives of the people in the Commission, representatives of the people in the Council. They do not want to talk with the automotive industry because of what you mentioned. They consider that we are crooks. It's their freedom to think that. They don't want to talk to us. I mean, I am the chairman of ACEA, European Automotive Association. We try to be involved in the process of defining the next rules. They don't want to talk to us. They just think they know, and okay, so they instruct. And we are a compliant company. And we always comply with the rules and regulations. So they tell us we go electric, no problem. We have the technology and we'll be better than our competitors. But at the end of the day, where is the life cycle analysis? Where is the full 360-degree picture? So the point is, corporations, we tend to be accused of many, many things. We are here to support the societies in which we operate. Because if we cannot operate if the society is not somewhere supporting us. And the society somewhere is supporting us. Because with all the rules that we are putting on the automobiles, people are still buying many, many automobiles. This year, they are going to buy 100 million cars on this planet. So they still want to protect their freedom of mobility. So if we don't align the empathetic and listening modes of all the stakeholders on this planet, then we have a big problem. And then you will tell me, well, that's a little bit impossible nowadays. Yes, it is. That's what I'm facing as the CEO of this company. Yeah. If I have a European Union and the MPs in the European Parliament who do not want to listen to us, they just say, you are crooks, we don't talk to you. Okay, fine. So how can we help the society? The only way for us to help the society is then to try a few proposals to the market and see if the market responds. But the market today, for the market to respond, I have to go on the direction of safety, comfort, convenience. But this direction of safety, comfort, and convenience over the last 50 years is more weight, more CO2, more rare resource consumption. So I think we have a major problem of a society, Western society at least, that is now living in pipes. You have the pipe of politicians, you have the pipe of corporations, you have the pipe of citizens, you have the wealthy, you have the poor. We are in pipes. People do not talk to each other, and they don't really want to listen to each other. It's absolutely obvious. And this is something we have been discussing with my peers of the automotive industry, at least in Europe. We are very eager to discuss and bring solutions. If you tell us tomorrow, I want you to create a mobility device that respects this frame, because this frame is going to ensure the protection of the planet, we can do that. No problem.
Yeah, sure.
We have
you can adapt to the
300,000 engineers, the best scientific education of the world. We can do that. But you need to create to us some kind of visibility in which direction we should go. And for that direction to be acceptable by the society, it cannot be only about rules and regulations. Why? Because the human brain, at least in the Western world, loves to go around the rules, as you know well, and specifically in France, as you know. So if you just play it through the negative side, which I'm going to punish you if you don't respect the rules, that's not what I call an aspirational, low carbon footprint life that would make me happy, even happier than today. So if I was to summarize, I really believe as a citizen that we are living in pipes. You have the pipe of the politicians, the pipe of the corporations, the pipe of the citizens, and those pipes are not really talking to each other. There are some tensions, from time to time it breaks, but they are not really listening to each other. If we were to be facing a framework where politicians or whoever administrations would tell us, we want you to propose a mobility device that respects this frame, X euros per kilometer of mobility, Y CO2 grams per kilometer, we would be happy to propose a solution. There's no problem. From a pure technology and scientific perspective, we can bring those solutions. We just need some visibility and some direction. But beyond that, we are talking still about mobility devices that look like cars, that you could eventually either hire or buy. We are also bringing other solutions that, like car sharing and shared mobility through our free-to-move mobility service brand. That may be also a direction. But if I was to have a huge fleet of cars to ensure that mobility is shared, eventually I would increase the level of utilization of each mobility device. Eventually I will reduce the number of cars that we have on the road. Eventually I would go in a direction which is more reasonable vis-à-vis the planet, but with the rebound effect.
Absolutely.
Eventually I would make the problem worse. So again, I don't think we can address this issue if we don't start by two basic things. One is, what is the enjoyable low carbon footprint life for the future that will make us happier than we are today, and that protects the planet? Point number one. Point number two, how we align regulations across the major regions of the world, North America, Europe, Asia, so that we all work in the same direction and we put our brains and our creativity at the service of finding the best solutions. I think that's the second direction. But you see, again, we are still trying to bring solutions to the market which are expecting to meet the needs of the consumers. So far, the consumers are still looking for safety, convenience, and comfort. And that is not moving us in a different direction from the one we had over the last 50 years. So something needs to change in the way we address happiness. How can we become happy with the low carbon footprint and without going systematically in the punitive direction, which is if you don't respect the rule, I'll hit you, which of course is not very enjoyable.
I think when we talk about comfort, one of the three parameters you are talking about, then car sharing is a challenge because, okay, when you are young and you can use some services and you can find new friends, and okay, maybe it's very good, but there are also many people, I think, which will not be ready to, let's say, reduce their property feeling when they are in the car.
Cocoon effect.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that this sharing approach, probably every time there is a kind of innovation that pops up, then we are always keen about saying, it will develop and deploy and generalize very rapidly. And because we have all these prospectivists and consulting firms that tell you that your business model is going to break out in the next 2 years if you don't take them as an expert. And I think when you look at this vision of Jeremy Rifkin, for instance, saying that, okay, at the end, we have the average car is just working 10% of the time, so let's use it completely, and we reduce by 10 the number of cars. That's what he says. I mean, it's a bit stupid because first, you have all these peak needs where for commuting or even for when you go in vacation, you look at all this traffic jam. I think many of the cars are used at the same time. So, okay, maybe we could reduce, I don't know, by a factor 2, 3, I don't know, but for sure not by a factor 10. That's the first point. Second point is this rebound effect that you are mentioning, and I think it will create some additional volumes if we stay in the same system. in the same constraints of mobility from work to home and so on. So I think sharing is interesting because, okay, maybe I reduce a little bit the fleet that is for rental on the weekend because maybe some people who are using the car only during the week will rent it out for the weekend and so on. There are some interesting things. And there will be some niche markets. And for instance, I really like the fact that the car sharing could be really for the commuters because here the rebound effect is maybe a bit lower. I don't know.
More limited, yeah.
Yeah, because at the end you have to go to work. That's it. Of course, then more and more people maybe will live farther. But at the very beginning, at least, there is not this Paris-Dunkirk rebound effect that we were mentioning before. So, and this is more difficult to monetize, by the way, because once two people have been put in contact, then they don't want to pay you on an everyday basis, of course. So the model is more the economical model is probably more difficult to find, and maybe there could be a kind of public service here, that the digital platforms that would put people in contact or organize that could be subsidized maybe by the public power. Why not? Because it's probably difficult to find the same kind of model as the long distance car sharing. But anyway, I think this will probably remain part of the solution, but we would make the same mistake as for the electric car. If we say, okay, the electric car is 100% of the solution, let's go for it. The same way, the car sharing, super, that's the solution, let's go for it. I think it's only part of the solution. And we have to faire feu de tout bois, we would say in French.
We have a wider menu.
Yeah, we have to put several sticks in the fire, and car sharing is probably one of them that could be addressed by some parts of the consumers for some types of usage, maybe for the second car, to save the second car and have a more intensive use of the small shared cars, and then we would keep a kind of family car that can be also used to go for vacation and so on, and it will be part of the solution. But I think we would be a bit too much dreamers, I think, if we would put all our environmental eggs in the basket.
Well, I understand that we still have a lot of things that we need to propose, many challenges, and I completely agree with you that we need a menu with different components. And this discussion has been absolutely fascinating. I wanted to thank you, and I would like to end up this chat with an anecdote. I am 60 years old, so I consider myself as a dinosaur. And I've been making everyday efforts to keep my mind flexible and open to new ideas, disruptive ideas. A few years ago, we were looking for the possibility to invest in a startup that would be focused on car sharing. And since then, we made a few investments in different companies, and we created the Free2Move mobility service brand. And at that point in time, I was in California, and as a dinosaur, I was discussing with a group of young people, late 20s, early 30s, and they created their startup. And we were discussing a 2 or 3 hour discussion about how it works, what are the pros and cons, what's difficult, what is easy, etc. And of course, we were discussing to see if there was some sense in taking a share in that company. And at that point in time, we were progressing in discussion, and considering that we would take a share, and as a second step, we would take control of the company, there was what we call an earn-out for the owners of the company. They would step out with a nice amount of money. And again, we were talking to young people in their late 20s, early 30s, and at the end of the discussion, because we were really discussing very openly, it was fascinating, I asked them, so if you get that money, the day you step out of the company, what are you going to do with all of this money? And this CEO of this startup was creating an entity that was explaining to me that 95% of the time the car is parked, so it's not very efficient. So we should share that mobility device for the level of utilization to be higher. He told me, well, with that money, the first thing I will do is I will buy a super sports car. So you see, that's where we are starting from.
It's a good summary of the challenge we have in front of us.
That means what? That means that at the end of the day, the automotive industry and at PSA, even though we are doing many efforts with mobility services, with recycling, with making our cars zero emission, etc., all of this needs to be embarked in a complete change of the way we live in the modern societies. And we are very open for that discussion, and I hope that this discussion somewhere contributed for PSA to understand better the world in which we are operating, and if we can bring more to the society, we are, of course, here for that. And we don't understand the sustainability of our company if it was not fully aligned with the expectations of our societies. But we also believe that the expectations of the societies are very contradictory. They are very unstable, and so far we need to clarify also that direction. So thank you very much. It was fascinating.
Thank you for your
openness and
transparency.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.